Going to the gym can be discouraging, especially if you're putting in the work but barely seeing changes. But with Tonal, you can actually see your progress with every workout. Tonal provides the convenience of a full gym and the expertise of a personal trainer anytime at home with one sleek system. Designed to reduce your mental load, Tonal is the ultimate strength training system, helping you focus less on workout planning and more on getting results. No more second-guessing your technique. Tonal gives you real-time coaching cues to dial in your form and help you lift safely and effectively. After a quick assessment, Tonal sets the optimal weight for every move and adjusts in 1 pound increments as you get stronger, so you're always challenged. Tonal lets you choose from a variety of expert-led workouts, from strength to aero hit to yoga and mobility, to keep you coming back for more. For a limited time, go to Tonal.com to get $500 off your Tonal purchase, plus a free 4-year warranty. That's Tonal.com for $500 off, plus a free 4-year warranty. Tonal.com.
Sports Card Nation, the hobby is the people. Weekly news and interviews, it's your number one source. Sports Card Nation, the hobby is the people. Sports Card Nation.
What is up, everyone? Welcome to episode 339 of Sports Card Nation podcast. Have a guest today that it's been on my list and always wanted him on, and just finally got around to asking him and talking to him, and so he's going to be on the show today. Drake McGruder, and Drake is a great hobby ambassador, big Peyton Manning guy, wrestling, hails from Memphis, Tennessee. We're going to talk to him about his kind of hobby journey, collecting journey, some national talk. It's great conversation, and happy to have him on, and hopefully be on this week and next week, and love to have him on again, because there were some things we didn't even cover that was on my list. So with that being said, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Drake, and that rhymes, and I didn't do that on purpose.
Iron Sports Cards is your number one source for all your PSA and other grading submissions. Their elite status improves turnaround times. Heck, they even provide the card savers. Their chat rooms provide updates on all your submissions. They also offer wax options and single cards to cover all the bases. Check them out on Facebook at Iron Sports Cards Group, or on the web at ironsportscards.com, or even give them a call at 1-877-IRON-PSA. Rob's got you covered.
Real happy to be joined by my next guest here on Sports Card Nation. He's been on my list to get on the show, and since we went to 2 episodes, like double episodes, we get less guests on each month. So that it's taken me a little bit. That's on me, but glad to have him on. Mr. Drake McGruder, welcome to Sports Card Nation.
Hey, John. Thanks. Thank you very much for having me on. I'm a longtime listener, first-time caller, as they say in the radio business. So I've long been a fan of your show, and I'm excited to be on.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, and glad you're here. Again, kind of, first time on, hopefully not the only time on, and we'll have you back again. But being the first time on, it's kind of the standard fair opening question, right? How did we get here? Where did it all start for young Drake to where we are now? But where did the hobby first start for you?
Yeah, so when I was, 5, 6 years old, my aunt, and just for background for listeners, I grew up in the Memphis area, hence my love for wrestling, which we'll talk about in just a bit. But so my aunt, for my birthday, gifted me some of her old, 60s and 70s football and baseball cards and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't really know much about them. I just thought they were really cool photos. And then I would flip through and I would see some names of people that I knew. And I looked to read the back and all that. And I was like, well, this is kind of neat. And she gave them to me in a binder, which I still have, by the way. I still have all the cards that she gave me. And just to say, that's a philosophy that I have. If someone ever gives me a card, I never get right. That's a gift and that whole sort of thing. And so that was my first kind of experience into cards. But then growing up as a kid, we had several hobby shops where I grew up, just outside of Memphis. And whenever you got good grades on your report card, or you did good in whatever, that was kind of what my parents and some of my friend parents would do to recognize like that accomplishment. We would go to the hobby shop and either get some packs of cards or a box of cards, because back then, you get a box of cards for $50 or whatever, right? And
the good old days.
Yeah, exactly. And so we would bust through the cards, and you would, try to find the players you like. I remember in the early 90s, it was like everybody wanted, Chris Webber and Nick Van Exel and, on the basketball side and that whole sort of stuff. And then you'd trade with your friends, and you'd go with your next door neighbors and just kind of, trade and that whole sort of thing. And it was, it was fun to read about the players. And then all of a sudden you'd pull out this card, and, you'd be like, wow, this is really cool. And then you would run and check out the Beckett and see the price. And then the next month it either had the up arrow or the down arrow and that whole sort of thing. So that's kind of what got me started into the hobby.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's funny how the hobbies change, but there's still some things that, have remained the same. You mentioned wrestling. Let's kind of tackle that off the bat. I watch wrestling. I wouldn't say I'm a wrestling fan. I know the names. My son had probably a 4 to 6 year period where he was really big into it. We went to some live events, even a pay-per-view in Pittsburgh. We've seen strides. It's always been popular as a sport outside the trading cards. That's never been a question. But we've seen the rise in popularity when we're talking about the hobby space, with people collecting it, getting into it. Kind of, what was it for you, and how do you see it? Where the wrestling hobby is today, maybe even comparatively speaking to where it was.
Yeah. So just kind of some background, like I said, I grew up in the Memphis area. Wrestling was big around Memphis with Jerry Lawler and, the folks that came up through the scene on their way to the World Wrestling Federation or WCW or kind of wherever they went. And so just about every Monday night, my dad was taking me down to the Mid-South Coliseum, and we'd watch the wrestling matches, and I would get programs signed by people and, that whole sort of thing. And then you'd go to the, Monday Night Raw or Monday Nitro, and you'd get, T-shirts or belts and all that sort of stuff. And that was kind of my experience into wrestling, or like getting into wrestling. And you would have like Monday Night Raw and Nitro watch party. You'd grill out with your friends, and which I'm sure my parents just loved, right? Having a bunch of kids over to, watch wrestling, and then they're the ones having to do all the cooking and clean up and that whole sort of thing. And then my friends and I, we'd develop these little neighborhood wrestling leagues on the trampoline. We'd go down to Home Depot and get trash cans and tables and ladders and shoot off fireworks. And sometimes we would set the yard on fire, because I learned quickly you don't light a firework in the middle of December with a bunch of brown grass. And so we did the whole wrestling thing. I mean, we were eaten up with wrestling, and it just kind of, it continued through college and that whole sort of thing. And I would keep up with it, sometimes more than others. I know in college, sometimes they would show like the pay-per-views at either like a Hooters or a Buffalo Wild Wings or whatever. And that was just a way for some buddies to get together and go watch the event, have some drinks, some wings, stuff like that. And that was just a good way to bond. And so it just kept going on. And then I got married. And I think my wife thought she could change me, like, oh, this is just a phase that he's going through. He's going to grow out of it. And I often tell her, I said, you can take the boy out of Memphis, but you can't take the Memphis out of the boy. And so I just kept on with wrestling and kept watching it. And, it's a big soap opera, as they all say. It kind of progresses and keeps building. And then, just when you think like, okay, I'm not really feeling it much anymore, they'll bring back The Rock or somebody like that, or Stone Cold Steve Austin. And you're like, man, that's really cool. That drives the nostalgia. And so when I look over my shoulder, I've got some like signed wrestling boots of Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair and The Undertaker and that sort of stuff. So I had like wrestling memorabilia, and I didn't even know cards existed. And then, back after getting into the hobby back in 2019, a little while after that, I was really enamored with kind of the shiny cards. and that sort of thing. And I was
Going to the gym can be discouraging, especially if you're putting in the work but barely seeing changes. But with Tonal, you can actually see your progress with every workout. Tonal provides the convenience of a full gym and the expertise of a personal trainer anytime at home with one sleek system. Designed to reduce your mental load, Tonal is the ultimate strength training system, helping you focus less on workout planning and more on getting results. No more second-guessing your technique. Tonal gives you real-time coaching cues to dial in your form and help you lift safely and effectively. After a quick assessment, Tonal sets the optimal weight for every move and adjusts in 1-pound increments as you get stronger, so you're always challenged. Tonal lets you choose from a variety of expert-led workouts, from strength to aero hit to yoga and mobility, to keep you coming back for more. For a limited time, go to Tonal.com to get $500 off your Tonal purchase, plus a free 4-year warranty. That's Tonal.com for $500 off, plus a free 4-year warranty. Tonal.com.
I was actually listening to the old Lucas, Tigers, and Bronze podcast, and they had a guy, I think he was their first guest actually, named David Peck, that came on, and he started talking about a set called the 1982 Wrestling All-Stars, and I was like, what is he talking about? I didn't even know wrestling cards existed. And I reached back out to my hobby shop back home, and I said, hey, like when I was growing up, did you guys have wrestling cards? And they said, no, like we knew about them, but we tried. They said they got them in, but nobody wanted them, and so they didn't restock, right? And so I was like, well, this is kind of cool. So I got in and I started looking, and I was like, well, that's kind of cool. There's these 82 All-Stars, and oh gosh, there's Hulk Hogan, and there's Ric Flair and Jerry Lawler. You know, there's Andre the Giant, a whole bunch of other names. So then that just kind of started down kind of like, well, gosh, there's cards in the 80s. And then, well, there's more wrestling cards in the 90s. Well, this is kind of cool. And then around that same time, my friend Brett McGrath, who is known as Stacking Slabs, he was like, hey, Drake, did you know, like, because he and I both kind of like similar type stuff in Peyton Manning and wrestling. He said, did you know 2014 Topps Chrome has like these gold refractors? And I was like, really? And he goes, yeah, and you can get the Rock gold refractor for like $70. I'm like, well, that's kind of cool too, you know? And so he and I went, and we were just buying up any name we saw. It was Rock, Triple H, John Cena, to Hulk Hogan, to Undertaker. We're just buying gold refractors and that whole sort of thing. And, you know, that's really what got me back into whole like collecting wrestling cards. Is I was like, well, this is kind of cool because, you know, I like wrestling. I like shiny cards. I like the vintage cards too. I mean, I still had plenty of those like sitting around, but I was like, this is something that just, it appeals to me a lot. And seeing the photography on some of the cards, you know, takes you back to moments. Nostalgia is very big for me. And so it's been great to, you know, get back into wrestling cards and, you know, really see where they were, you know, largely ignored for so long. And then they have the shiny stuff, and then Panini comes into play in 2022. And then there's just this rush of people to it. And all of a sudden the values just went crazy insane. And then we've seen that kind of continue on now back to the Fanatics and Topps era. And there's so many more people in wrestling cards now than there were just, you know, think about 5 years ago. Sometimes 5 years seems like a long time. It's really not that long of a time. And, you know, the explosion in wrestling cards and the in the community around wrestling cards has been really great to see.
Yeah, no doubt. And you know, I found it interesting that you're in sort of a wrestling hotbed, but that the cards never really was part of that. What do you attribute maybe that? Why not the cards? It just people didn't know, they like yourself, just didn't know they existed, and it was sort of out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, I think that was part of it. I think, you know, and I'm gonna answer this not knowing exactly, but I think maybe the accessibility may not have been good. You know, for example, like the 82 Wrestling All-Star sets, you know, they came from a magazine. It was like a mail order thing. You had to send it in, and they would send you the package of cards or whatever. So it wasn't like distributors had them, you know, in troves. And you know, and I think on like the 2014 Topps Chrome set, fast forward a little bit, I think there were only like, I don't know, I forget how many cases, but not that many cases compared to what you see in other sets. And so I think just the access to them was not much. But, you know, I've spoken a little bit previously is what's interesting is that wrestling fans have long always spent lots of money to get the belts and the signed belts. And I remember going as a kid and I just wanted like a T-shirt that said "suck it" across it, you know, or whatever for DX. And it was like $25. And my dad was like, son, that is way too much for a shirt, which A, it was. B, I'm thankful he didn't let me wear a shirt with "suck it" across the front because that's something that I wouldn't let my son do now. So, But yeah, but you would just go to those merchandise stands, and even you see it now at wrestling events. Because I actually took my son to one a SmackDown not too long ago over in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the line just wraps around those merchandise stands, and you're going, these people are spending just enormous amounts of money on this stuff that is cool to have, but eventually the t-shirt's going to wear out, or you're going to outgrow it, or the little chain that someone's wearing or whatever is going to get sold at a garage sale or whatever. But they are just making a killing on merchandise sales and things of that nature, which is great to them. But I've often wondered, it's like, well, why did people okay with spending that much money on that, but they're not okay or they don't spend as much money on the wrestling stuff? And I think it's just the whole accessibility to the product, number one, which is a lot better now. And then I think accessibility to the superstars. And so I think, the growth you're seeing with wrestling cards in the hobby, right? They're bringing wrestlers to Fanatics Fest. You could watch a Monday Night Raw or a SmackDown or whatever, and there's Topps promotion on there talking about cards and things like that. And so I think, more kids and more people are finding out about it. And now you can go to your hobby shop and you can get a box of Topps Chrome or Panini Prism or something like that, which I think is really.
Yeah, all great points.
You are listening to the Sports Card Nation podcast. We'll be right back after this break.
For nearly 50 years, Sports Collectors Digest has been the voice of the hobby, bringing you comprehensive coverage of the sports collectible industry. From industry news, auction results, market analysis, and in-depth stories about collectors and their collections, Sports Collectors Digest has everything you need to know about the hobby. SCD is also your leading source for listings of sports collectible dealers, card shops, card shows, and the latest from the industry's top companies. To check out all the latest news or to subscribe to the hobby's oldest magazine, visit sportscollectorsdigest.com or call 1-800-829-5561.
We are back.
I had Gelman on, who's I'm sure you know.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things I said to him is, I don't know why, when I took my son to these wrestling events, whether it would have been when Panini held the licensing or now with Topps and Fanatics or whoever it may be who holds the licensing, it'd be nice to see them sort of go to these events, or not even have to go, but have product there, or free promo packs as people come through the turnstiles to attend the event, or even give them to just the kids if they want to even limit them. Hey, we can't give them to everybody, but all kids 16 or under, or 12 and under, whatever they deem the cutoff, is going to get a free promo pack from Panini, from Topps of wrestling, to make people aware that, hey, there's, besides those shirts and trinkets, there's cards too, and we're making, and sort of get that sort of word out there. And he liked it too. He didn't really have an explanation why we don't see more of that. We see it a little bit in certain other sports, even in those sports. Even the other sports can probably do a little more. And when I say sports, I'm really talking about the manufacturers themselves, in partnership with the venues as well, to get these cards in. A kid that comes through that gets handed a pack of wrestling cards said, I didn't even know they made these. I want more of these. Right. Why do you think that's something we'll see more of in the future? And why haven't we seen it already? Where do you think the disconnect is there? Whose fault is that, I guess, maybe?
Yeah, I'd probably say it's probably a mix. You wouldn't talk about fault, but it's probably a mix of the manufacturer, right? Getting those types of packs, right? Because they're looking at it as, okay, what can I get the most bang for my buck, right? And so let's build these boxes out and do all that sort of thing. And so without thinking about the whole accessibility piece, again, which I think Topps and Fanatics is doing it better now with having accessibility to wrestlers at Fanatics Fest. I do think that they may be handing out, some packs and things like that to visitors, and at the national and stuff. I'm sure they'll have some kind of wrestling presence in packs that you can get or redeem or something like that. So I'll certainly be curious around that. But I think the other piece of it is even though wrestlers have long signed autographs and gone to these signings and things like that, I think they haven't really taken the card aspect of it seriously. And really known, because sometimes you would just get cards and there's just a scribbled signature, or, it just wasn't really, a big focus for them now. But I think now, especially with some of the inscriptions you've seen on cards, and then some of the wrestlers that post the cards on their social media, and so on and so forth, there's starting to get to be more of like an acceptance of like, hey, this is cool. And, we're becoming part of the hobby. And then maybe a month or so ago, they had some wrestlers go out to hobby shops and actually, rip some boxes with fans, and they have people come there and they can take pictures and rip boxes and all that. And so I think that that's only helping things to grow and become more mainstream. But in terms of, why they didn't do it in the past, it's super tough to say. I think it's just, the cards and card hobby was still so much like a niche kind of thing, kind of off in the shadows a little bit, and then it's slowly becoming, it's getting a big backer such as Fanatics to really push that thing mainstream and really be involved in all the sports. And you see, they're wearing patches at WrestleMania that they're going to put into a card now, and so that it allows people to link things of like, saw a patch in the ring at WrestleMania, now patches in card, much as what you saw with like the Topps debut patches in baseball. So I think it's only going to continue to grow. And I think as they come up with new ideas of how to make that connection and get more, event worn items and signatures from people that haven't signed in a long time, because I think that's one thing too, is for a long time, Topps was only getting like the same people to sign over and over and over again. And so, it's like, how many autographs of, Natalia, nothing against Natalia, does somebody really need, or, something like that. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with you. And also, it seems like the licensing itself, Drake, has changed its hand kind of every 1 or 2 years. So the companies are, you wonder, are they in it for the long haul, or do they know like, hey, we might only have this a couple years, then someone else is going to get it. Maybe we'll get it back down the line. Where I think with your baseballs and football, basketball, hockey's obviously on the upper deck side of the house. But, I think they look at those as more long-term, 5-10 years, or now in Fanatics' case, 20-year deal. With wrestling, we haven't seen licensing on those length of deals. So, like, even if they wanted to do that, and again, I'm going to sound like I'm sticking up for them a little bit. I guess maybe I am a little bit. But even if they wanted to do that, by the time they really got all the wheels greased and things in motion, they may lose the license anyway, and then someone else has it. So,
yep.
And maybe when we see a longer-term deal, we'll see maybe more so of that, But, again, the hobby, the wrestling hobby has grown, like you said, in the last 5 years tremendously. You don't even have to be in it to know that's the case. When you got into the card hobby of the wrestling side, like you said, what was your approach? Were you just collecting the guys that you kind of followed when you were a younger fan? Were you putting sets together? Kind of, how did you attack being a wrestling collector?
Yeah, so I was really, again, returning back in 2019 and, first learning about the Wrestling All-Stars. I wanted to go back and, get the guys that I liked growing up, right? So Hulk Hogan's and Andre the Giant's and the Ric Flairs and the Memphis Connection and Jerry Lawler and, so on and so forth, some other folks from that from that set too. And then, moving on a little bit further, and Bret Hart and Macho Man Randy Savage. And then you get into the 90s and Stone Cold Steve Austin, and I found out that he had a card that he signed. And then there was the 1994 action pack set with, The Undertaker and Macho Man and Randy Savage. And that was, the first cards that they had signed. And, they were, limited to 500 copies a piece, but they're almost impossible to find. And try finding one with a good signature. They're really, really tough. So that was kind of what I was looking into. In terms of that. And then you fast forward a little bit. And then like I mentioned, I learned about that 2014 Topps Chrome set. And I knew I liked, again, as a kid growing up, and then even getting back at the hobby, I knew I love, gold refractors and super refractors and that sort of thing. And so I, was really taking the shotgun approach. And if I would see it, anybody with a gold refractor and it seemed to be priced well, then I would buy it. Right. And I had this huge collection of like 2014 Topps Chrome gold refractors. And then I learned there was a 2015 Topps Chrome set, and I'm picking up those gold refractors. And then the 2020 set came out. And so you're excited about, oh, well, this is new and let's go chase after these. And then there's a 2021 and there's Finest. And then I learned about, okay, well, then there's this, Topps Transcendent collection. And so started getting, some of the first autographs of like Vince McMahon that he had. And then in 2021, they had the Superfractor, the cards that were signed. And so I was chasing after some of those. So it was really just, kind of getting back to my roots of like, what did I like in other sports? And so let's buy these. And it was interesting because it didn't really, it took a long time for that to catch on in wrestling. Because I'll tell you that wrestling collectors and, sometimes for obvious reason, we're all about collecting the females, right? They wanted the female cards with the signatures or ones they had kissed and then signed and, and all that kind of stuff. So wrestling collectors can be a unique bunch sometimes, but, that was kind of the approach to it. And so, oftentimes cards of, Trish Stratus or Charlotte Flair or Becky Lynch or Lita or people like that were outselling people like The Rock, Roman Reigns, and even Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and that sort of thing. And so it was good for me because I wasn't into really collecting the women. I wanted to get more on the men's side of things. So, like I said, I was just taking the shotgun approach with things and just did that. And then, like I was when I was a kid, I wasn't buying it because I was like, ooh, this seems like if I buy this for $70, one day I can sell this for $1,000. That wasn't my thought. But again, with everybody coming back in and, supply being so short and demand increasing, because like I said, there weren't as many cases produced of that stuff in 2015. It's really, really hard to find. Like if you go out right now on eBay and start looking for 2014 Topps Chrome Gold refractors of big names like The Rock, John Cena, people like that, even though they're out of 50, they're like impossible to find, especially in a high grade, because some of the high grade like PSA 10s are like Pop 1, Pop 2, Pop 3. And so it just to finalize answering your question, it was looking at the guys that I grew up and had nostalgia for, but it was also some of the newer folks that newer wrestlers that I was interested in. I was like, well, this Roman Reigns guy is kind of cool. And then, John Cena was a little bit newer, than some of those more vintage guys. And I liked him a lot. And so I got into collecting him some and things like that. So it was a mix of old and new, more on the nostalgia side and trying to pick up some of their, cards of different parallels and sets that I like.
Yeah, of people you followed or had followed, stuff you enjoyed, right? You mentioned like it's not about buying it on Monday and selling it on Wednesday. We've seen that in other sports, even a lot, especially during the COVID crescendo. Do you see less of that in the wrestling hobby space, or percentage wise, or does it happen there along the same line where someone is just purchasing something with the full intention, like, hey, I don't love it, I just know I can make a quick buck on it?
Yeah, I'd say it's a mix. I mean, certainly in the last 2-3 years, that people doing that has increased exponentially. And I'll start with, people can do whatever they want. It's their cards. What my opinion is shouldn't affect how someone does things. Like, even though I may disagree with what's being done, that's the prerogative. But I think what we find a lot in like wrestling cards is people will either publicly or privately, and I'll back up a little bit. Wrestling collectors sometimes didn't even know what they had, right? And so you would sometimes see somebody list like a Superfractor or a Black Finite Prism, and they would list it for way under where it should be market value, just because they didn't know for whatever reason. They didn't know what they had. And so then you see somebody, snipe that up, and then they immediately go and list it for probably 5 to 10x market value on eBay, and then it just sits there and it rots away. And I've shared this before with Gelman and with Brett and others. Like, I really feel for people, because there's a lot of people that, that may not have the means and may be scrounging together to get that Jey Uso collection, or get like one of the lesser names or something like that. That's maybe not considered an investable or a flippable type wrestler or whatever. And some of these people have just taken this card and then just go list it at this insane price on eBay. And that really, it's cost prohibitive for that person to buy that card. Like, it just doesn't make sense, And so I think I don't know if there's like gatekeeping a little bit or really what it is, but it bugs me a little bit when there's a group of people that go in and buy stuff for the sole purpose of like, I want to hold this thing hostage, or I want to corner the market, and then try to, get a whole lot more money than what I paid for it and stuff. So, but yeah, there's certainly, people that flip their way into bigger cards. And I think, the streams like Whatnot and other selling platforms and all that sort of thing has enabled people to do that. And that's certainly fun. To kind of watch some of those things from time to time, and see that. But yeah, there's definitely flippers and wrestling cards just like there are in all segments of the hobby.
Yeah, no doubt. While we may not collect for the purpose of doing that. Like you said, to each their own, right? There's people who that's just their angle. It is what it is. And, anytime I've had anyone on and wrestling cards comes up, the one thing I always get from whoever the guest is how great like the wrestling hobby community is, like to help each other out, whether someone's missing a card or searching for something hard to find and kind of be on the lookout for. And we see that obviously in other aspects, baseball collectors, but it's always something that definitely comes up, the camaraderie, if you will, of the wrestling hobby community. What do you attribute that to? Just because it's just a close-knit sort of group? Is it as simple as that? What say you there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's just because it's more of a smaller community, and again, there's fewer sets and things, and so you can instantly, whether it's a certain wrestler you collect or a certain type of card like a parallel or whatever, you can instantly kind of like gravitate to those folks, and you kind of become a little community there. So sometimes there's like a vintage community, and that group talks a lot and helps each other out. Then there's a modern, ultra modern, and that group stays together, and that sort of thing. But big props to our friend Mr. Gelman, like you talked about before. He put together a big spreadsheet where people send in like, here's who I collect. And so if I have a card and I'm like, hey, I'm thinking about moving this card, I always go to that spreadsheet first and say, okay, who's a Triple H collector maybe? And I want to go and reach out to those people first. And try to say, hey, you're a collector. I would love for you to have this card. What I want for it, either say yes or no, right? That's fine. And to me, and I've shared this before, I think it brings me greater enjoyment, like knowing cards are going to a collector or somebody that's going to appreciate them, more so than just sending it off to auction or consignment, which sometimes we have to do, right? That's just, it's sometimes it's a lot easier to throw a bunch of cards in a box and send it to Fanatics Collect or to eBay or whatever and just wipe your hands, right? But it's great fun for me to kind of know where all my cards are going and like know who has them and, see their excitement versus just some, random person that wins it in an auction or whatever that may be trying to flip it or may not collect that person or whatever. And so that to me is just it brings me a lot of enjoyment to be able to do that. But it's really funny about the wrestling community is I actually moved some cards to an individual just yesterday, in fact, and he asked me if I would send him a photo. And I used my kitchen table that I use for most of my photos. And he posted on his story and didn't tag me. And I got like 3 direct messages and a text message within like 30 minutes and was like, wow, these are your cards. Very cool, da, da, da. And I'm like, well, how did you know that? And they said, oh, your table. I recognize your table. So it's just neat. Sometimes it feels really big, but other times, like, in that instance, it feels small.
Your kitchen table gave you away, Drake. You're gonna have to change. You're gonna have to put a tablecloth on that, or if it has one, you have to switch it out. But caught by the kitchen table, as they say. That's funny. And again, that's a testament to like the community, how you guys, how everyone knows everyone and what you collect, and you hit it right on the head. There is something to be said when someone collects a certain person or athlete and you can help add one that they don't have. I think it's a two-way street of adrenaline, right? You made their sort of day, and obviously if their day gets made by adding a card, it's a win-win. And I know the feeling and enjoy it, and you try to do that as much as we can. Great catching up with Drake finally. Great guy, great ambassador. He travels a lot for his job and then works in some of the hobby into his off time. And again, that's being an ambassador, right? Kind of posts what he's doing, or if he goes to a card shop or show, and again, knowledgeable, right? Knows this stuff. And again, it was great having him on, and we're not done. That was only part one. As you know, we do double episodes. So part two next week, and we'll also have him back on, because a lot of stuff I wanted to talk to him about we didn't even get to. So we'll have to do it again. So we're going to hear from our Hobby is the People announcer of the week, and then we're going to wrap up the show. Thanks, everybody.
Time for our Hobby is the People announcer of the week.
This is Ed Johnson from Toronto in Canada, collector of Vladdy Jr., Blue Jays, Roberto Clemente, and Willie Mays. Never forget, the hobby is the people.
If you'd like to be the Hobby is the People announcer of the week, do a WAV or MP3 file and send it to sportscardnationpc@gmail.com.
Hobby Hotline is the hobby's only live interactive call-in show. Join some of your favorite hobby personalities every Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, to discuss the hottest hobby topics. If you miss us live, catch us after the fact on all major podcast platforms. Follow us on socials at Hobby Hotline.